Kirkbride buildings were mental asylums that were popular in the mid-19th century. Spread across a campus layout, the hospitals were massive structures, stretched out over open farmland. The Kirkbride plan at the time was a progressive way of treating the mentally ill, where the facility itself was supposed to have a curative effect on the patients. They were a marvel to look at, with their Victorian style and unique architecture, unlike anything you'll see today. In Massachusetts, where I live, 4 Kirkbride Mental Hospitals were built between 1853 and 1878. However, the Kirkbride plan would become an antiquated way of treating the mentally ill. The hospital campuses were eventually abandoned by the state, costing too much to keep up with and renovate. And there they would sit, rotting away in the rural areas of Massachusetts, the East Coast version of a ghost town. The only one I was able to visit in its entirety was Medfield State before it was demolished in 2006. I always wanted to see the other asylums dispersed across the state, but most of them are either gone or just a shell of what they once were. However, there's one historic hospital that came along shortly after the 4 Kirkbride buildings, built under a layout known as the cottage plan. By the late 19th century, doctors were looking to improve on the theory that the building and environment could help treat the patients. By this point, people were beginning to think the monolithic asylums of the Kirkbride plans, with their linear style, would be more effective spread out in smaller, cottage-like structures. A perfect example of this still exists in Medfield, Massachusetts. In fact, it was the first hospital in the state to be built under the cottage plan, officially opening in May 1896. At the peak of the hospital's run, 58 buildings were built inside the grounds of the campus. The idea was to make the living conditions more home-like, with individual buildings providing better light and ventilation. Much like the Kirkbride plan it followed after, Medfield raised its own livestock and produce, and generated its own heat, light, and power in the beginning. This self-sufficient hospital was operating all the way up until 2003. Within the first decade of its opening, over 1,500 patients would occupy the asylum. By the 1930s, the hospital was overcrowded with over 2,300. It's amazing, but for a lot of years, more people actually lived here than in the rest of the town of Medfield. It's the total antithesis of today, where the term ghost town really does sound appropriate. I visited Medfield State Hospital back in the summer of 2012, while they were in the process of tearing down the Clark building, which was built back in the late 1950s. As for the rest of Medfield State, it's safe, at least for now. Turns out an old coal-fired power plant on the property has contaminated a portion of the grounds, and will cost a lot of money to fix before the land can be redeveloped, causing a stall in the future plans of the site. It's too early now to know what will become of the land. Some ideas have been kicked around like a golf course or a college campus, but the general consensus seems to be it's best suited for residential development. Several years ago, the town and state agreed to a plan that would put 440 units of housing at the site. However, the land is not zoned for it, causing another stall in the future of the hospital, requiring a vote of the town meeting. My suggestion is to get out and visit the grounds like I did, before it's too late. Today, a private security company patrols the grounds of the hospital, but you're allowed to visit during the day. The first time can be overwhelming, because there's a lot to see. The best thing to do is just walk around and take it all in. Everywhere you look, you'll see building after building after building. On my self-guided tour, I saw a little bit of everything. A lot of the buildings were boarded up, as I expected to see, but there was also a lot that still had their windows intact, and some were even left wide open. I was able to get a peek inside some of the hospital cabins. I mostly saw open rooms with doors leading off into eerie hallways. It always interests me to see what gets left behind. In this room, it was a lone chair that was able to survive the clean-out, forever left in the corner, frozen in time. Other rooms looked newer inside, like they had been recently renovated. The perfect contrast to the dense overgrowth outside that shows just how much time has passed since the hospital's been closed. Another building I looked inside, I could see that the ceiling had collapsed. This is a very common thing that happens at an abandoned mental hospital, and it's just another reminder of how dangerous it can be to walk around inside a place like this. Throw in the danger to your lungs, and it's no wonder why they sealed off the buildings a long time ago. Continuing on to the outskirts of the campus, it's easy to see why they chose this location. It has open fields that are ideal for grape farming, which they did up here until the late 1960s. All throughout my trip, I kept looking to see if I could recognize anything from the movie Shutter Island. That's right, Medfield State Hospital was scouted as a Hollywood film location, and it's not the only time, because it was also featured in the 2009 movie The Box. But with Shutter Island, the hospital's featured more discernibly, filming pretty much all the hospital scenes on location, making use of a lot of the campus. Walking around, it was tough to determine what was exactly used in the movie. I was able to grab some screen grabs after my visit to the hospital. This building here with the clock tower is featured throughout the film, including the final scene. Tracking down all the buildings used in Shutter Island, however, is a whole other video in itself. For now, I thought I'd at least mention where you can see Medfield State on the big screen. I really enjoyed my trip to Medfield State Hospital. The atmosphere there is very heavy. Each building is a separate reminder of the thousands of patients that passed through during its lifetime, and of the people who died at the hospital that for a time averaged 4 deaths a week. Whatever this land becomes, let's not forget that. Whether it's a golf course, college campus, or an apartment complex, it's in danger of becoming just a memory for those who went and saw it while they could.